Hi, I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs, and I'm here today with an old friend, Tony Valeri, who is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at ArcelorMittal Dofasco. And Tony, I'd like to tease that you've been in the witness protection program for the better part of the last decade, so it really is a pleasure to have you here. We're going to reminisce a little bit about growing up in Hamilton, about life in politics, and then talk about some of the work that we're doing together at ArcelorMittal and at the Community Foundation. I want to start, though, by telling a story, because I was with your former Prime Minister, Paul Martin, not that long ago, and of course he's doing amazing work with Aboriginal education in the country, and he said to me that I had to convey a message, and that was twofold. One was that you were one of his best ever cabinet ministers, and second was that you needed a haircut, and I just wanted to pass that on now that we're on the air. Talk to me a little bit about how you came to be involved in public life. And let me confess my bias up front, because we had the chance to work together a lifetime ago when we were both in public life, and you were and remain one of the pleasures of my professional life, getting things done with you. So just talk about how a kid from Northeast Hamilton ended up in the federal cabinet.
Sure, it's probably no different than a lot of other people, but it was never say a lifelong passion to enter public office, but it was something that at the time, back in 92, 93, I was in a small business working away. I was involved a little bit with the various chambers in different fora, either going to a meeting, not formally, but just in that circle of folks and having discussions around state of the economy, what was the future of Canada at the time. And Paul Martin was out there talking about what he wanted to do in terms of economic development in Canada, and a group of us got together and said, well, geez, you know, why doesn't someone step up? Why don't we get someone in this game? And I was approached. My close friends actually approached me and said, you know, one of us needs to run. What about you? And I agreed, but I said I would take the step if there was actually some support for it, right? And so we tested the waters a bit informally and to see whether there was some appetite out there, and there was, and the rest is history. I mean, it was brought together folks that weren't necessarily political, you know, up to that point, but did come together as a team and work through various nominations and ultimately campaigns. It's been a great experience for me, and I treasure it.
Back up a bit.
Sure.
Any family history of involvement either with the Liberal Party or the political process?
Well, I mean, the political process. I mean, I as a young person, you know, played a role in various campaigns, either door knocking or delivering different material door to door as part of volunteering for various campaigns. But from a family perspective, there was no real attachment to the political process in any formal way. Certainly, you know, our family always voted. My dad always made a point of saying we needed to vote, the importance of voting, you know, coming to Canada. So that was always instilled. That political process was always part of the dialogue around the kitchen table, but there was never a formal attachment to any political campaign or movement, I think, prior to my getting involved in the federal level.
Your dad was a steel worker at Dofasco?
My dad worked at Dofasco, yeah, as well.
Amazing. Yeah. So you kind of glossed over the fact that you were part of a couple of the most hotly contested nomination races, maybe in Canadian, certainly in local political history. So your entree to the game. Just talk about, you talked about a group of friends getting together, which is similar to the experience I had. Well, one of us should do this. Well, okay.
What about you?
What about you? So just talk about that, because that was not a slam dunk nomination to start, nor was it any guarantee that you're going to end up in government.
No, exactly, right. I mean, there was no guarantee that we would end up in government at the time. In fact, I think the polls were sort of, I think the Conservatives were actually ahead of the polls when we were contemplating the nomination process. But like I said, we brought together a group of people that we sat down and we tried to understand the nomination process. What would it take? How would we mobilize a group of interested people to come out, say, for the first time in a nomination exercise, and so collectively put our heads together, put together a bit of a plan, and execute it. And it was, I mean, as you know, through the hard work of others, that we are fortunate to actually end up in public office. And this was the case here, where people really came out and supported me and the intent of renewal and change. Right. And that was really the theme going into that 93 campaign, at least at the local level, that we were looking for change and looking for a direction that would support the country. Deficit, we were a huge deficit at the time, and it was certainly something that I was wanting to, if I could, contribute to changing that trajectory.
So talk about the experience of, so you land in Ottawa, you've never served on a local school board or a city council, so even the introduction to governance, and now you're part of governing a country, has got to be an enormous learning process. So just reflect upon that a little bit, and then talk a little bit about the kind of definitive experiences that you got to have as first of all as a member, and then ultimately as a cabinet minister for Paul Martin.
Yeah, I mean, going to Ottawa, and I've always said I wish every Canadian could have the experience of actually, serving in public office, because it is something that you treasure, forever. Yep. I thought that there was incredible support when you got there, in terms of the parliamentary precinct, of the parliamentary, the infrastructure that was there to support members of Parliament. There was a huge cohort of new members that came in '93, so it was the first time that they started to provide some training, some support as to what to expect, and what were the accountabilities, and how would you operate and function in terms of committee? What did committee work look like? What did the constituency interface look like? So there was a bit of support that way. But I have to tell you, I approached it in a very similar fashion to when I was in business. Really looking at setting goals, setting objectives, surrounding yourself with, smart people, smarter people. I always say, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Right? You want to make sure you go and and you're around people that can really add value to what you're trying to accomplish. And I tried to do that in the people that I attracted, or tried to attract to my political experience. And then it was a step-by-step process, right? I mean, it's all about, when you're meeting with a constituent, I mean, there's always a need for assistance, or a need to convey a particular policy perspective. I think the importance of listening, importance of trying to understand people's perspective, and then ultimately seeing if you can translate that into something, either it's a policy initiative or a communication, making others aware that this is an issue for Canadians. So it was an approach that I thought, again, transferring skills that I developed prior to the political life to the political life, and now I find myself taking that experience in the political environment and bringing it back into the private sector.
So retrospectively, give me a high point.
Well, for me, I mean, there are a couple. I mean, it's hard to pick just one, but I would say, when I became parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Finance, Paul was a minister that was very focused on policy and very focused on big ideas and implementing these big ideas, and really left the work of the House, the legislative work, the parliamentary work, to the parliamentary secretary. So I had the great opportunity of having carriage of all of the finance bills, save and except the budget, which Paul would obviously deliver. And so I remember bringing in pension bills and bringing in all kinds of different finance bills. And then ultimately the balancing of the budget was significant. The introduction of the RESP was significant. Working on trying to bring
something that continues to pay dividends
for a lot of Canadians,
particularly for kids who otherwise wouldn't see a path to post-secondary. Right?
Yeah. So there are a number of initiatives and certainly legislative experience and initiatives that are certainly high points for me. And then when Paul became Prime Minister, I mean, becoming a cabinet minister, a Minister of Transport, and then ultimately House Leader. And to be House Leader in the first minority in 24 years, I mean, there was scarcely an individual that was at a senior level of public office in the public service that was there during the previous minority.
Right.
So it was really a learning curve for a lot of people.
Which would have been
as
the
well.
Clark government in '79. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the inevitable corresponding question is, when you look back at somebody who arguably was one of the best finance ministers of the modern era and then became prime minister for a relatively brief period, there has to be a part of you that says there's an element of political tragedy about not having the chance to have fulfilled the leadership that could have been provided. You look back, and of course you were part of maybe the most controversial local nominating race that I can remember. Fascinating in many dynamics, clearly a parting of the guard for the local Liberal Party, and that had to have been both personally very challenging and politically difficult.
Always challenging, certainly. But I think from, when you looked back at the transition when Paul was a finance minister and then to prime minister, and then we saw that change in 2004. I think there was a lot that Paul could have accomplished as prime minister in a majority government. Mm-hmm. I think that the challenges of a minority, where you were really always looking, you needed a significant amount of compromise. It was really needed to be a collaborative approach. I would argue that that collaborative approach wasn't always equally distributed amongst the parties because people had different objectives, right? I mean, when you're in opposition, your goal,
is be the government.
Is to be in government, and so you're going to look for, where is potentially the vulnerability? What can I exploit in this particular policy initiative? And so while I'm suggesting that I'm collaborating with you in order to move something forward, I'm actually looking for that vulnerability that I can capitalize on that might ultimately take the government down, so that you do have an opportunity to form government now in opposition and then in government, right? But there was a lot that we did accomplish. In terms of the minority government. You think of the Kelowna Accord, right? You think of a number of significant bills and initiatives that came through during that period of time. For me, from my own personal experience, it was probably the most exhilarating parliamentary experience for me, because I was right at the center of all of the negotiations and all of the collaborative efforts between the parties to move legislation through.
Great reflections.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we're halfway through and we got to take a short commercial break. I am with Tony Valeri, the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at ArcelorMittal Dofasco. I'm Terry Cooke. You'll be right back to see the balance of Vital Signs. And we're back. I'm Terry Cooke. You're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. I'm with an old friend, Tony Valeri, former federal cabinet minister, member for Stoney Creek, Hamilton East, and now the vice president of corporate affairs at ArcelorMittal Dofasco. And you've been there for a long time. Your last race was 2006. I want to talk about life after politics, because I had Rob McIsaac here recently, and you and he, I think, are perhaps some local exceptions to the rule that people are political lifers. In each case, we've gone on and reinvented ourselves doing other things in terms of career. And I was with our mutual friend Steve Paikin on the weekend, who's written a couple of books about how difficult it is for folks who have been enmeshed in the political process for a longer period of time to then go on and do other things. So talk to me about the day after you're no longer a member of the federal cabinet or a member of parliament, and you start to think about, what am I going to do? You're a young man and you've got talents and skills and you're in your hometown. Walk me through that process of kind of reinvention and thinking about what other contributions you wanted to make.
Right. Well, I think first of all, as you know, I mean, you enter every election, thinking about the day after the election, and you could easily be, out of public office. And so it's never, it's something you need to prepare for. The day you decide to enter public office, you need to prepare for what does it look like the day after an election when you are no longer going to be of service, right, to people in that way. And so for me, again, it was always about, what skills or what value could I bring to the table, whether that was in public office or whether today I think about it in the context of the private sector. What value is there for me to help the organization achieve its goals and its objectives? And so I think in a lot of ways.
But I'm going to push on this a little bit. For a whole bunch of people who have done what you and I have done, which is to serve in elections of importance and have the privilege of serving in high office, where you get to make decisions and the bureaucracy responds, and you have a connection to the electorate that can be invigorating. It's often hard for folks psychologically to think about, I'm now going to get up and go to work doing something fundamentally different, and I can't rely upon the acclaim or the perks or privileges of elected office. I now have to redefine myself and make a contribution. How did you?
Right. Well, I think we all need to remember that there's an importance of office as opposed to a person, right? I mean, there's position power. You're in office, and therefore you carry that authority of that public office, and then there's individual, there's an individual contribution that one can make. So I've always, in all my time in public office, I've always looked at this and said, people react, or I'm involved, or I'm part of conversations, or I'm part of this public policy dialogue because I have the honor of being in this public office, and you accept that, and you need to understand that, right? Yep. That beyond public office, you need to find other ways to make contributions to things that are important to you, things that are important to community. And so my transition, the day after the campaign, it was like, okay, today I'm not doing anything. but beyond that, it was about, where might I want to continue to be active and participate and provide some value. And right after the election, I started to do a little bit of work on my own as a consultant. I did some work with McMaster University and the research office in terms of the internationalization side of the university. It was now for me, I was able to leverage a lot of the international contacts that were made during my time in public office, and started to connect the university with universities and industry with industry. And that's an example of how you would transfer some of the experience that you would have had in public office. How does that advantage, another organization? How do you connect the dots for them?
And one thing I've come to know about you is ultimately you're a loyal person, loyal to the places that gave you an opportunity. You're a Mac grad, and I know you went back to do things there. And in the case of Dofasco, not only was your dad a longtime Dofasco employee, but it helped pay your way as a summer student to go on to do the things you got to do. And ultimately life came full circle, and you had the chance to join a leadership team there. So talk about the work that you have now been doing for a decade?
We're about 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah, about 6 years at Dofasco, and areas
that seems like longer than that.
Yeah, but it's been great. I mean, it's an exceptional organization. My focus is on government relations, trade, lots of trade going on with respect to what President Trump is talking about these days, corporate responsibility and communication, so that sort of encompasses the corporate affairs portfolio. A lot of work with respect to community investment and community involvement, lots of work in the STEM area, science, technology, engineering, and math. Dofasco is going through a demographic shift, just like many other organizations. We're retiring 300 to 400 a year. We're hiring in the professional, operational, and technical fields, and so science, technology, engineering, and math skills are very important to ensure we maintain a pipeline of talented individuals to continue to support the organization. So we're making investments there.
Talk about a bit about the ethos, the culture of the place, because it does strike me that, I mean, the Sherman family did, and the leadership over multi-generations did a remarkable job of convincing people they had to be good at making steel, but also committed to making a better Hamilton, right? The product is steel, your strength is people. The priorities were always leadership, sustainability, and quality. When you go from being a Canadian-owned local steel company to part of an international conglomerate, that's got to be tougher. And yet, it strikes me that somehow this group has managed to maintain that connective tissue.
Very much so, and I think just as an example of that, Dofasco is only one of 2 organizations inside of the ArcelorMittal family that has maintained its original name. So that speaks to a recognition of something that was going on at Dofasco in terms of the importance of the name and the importance of the reputation and certainly the importance of the culture. Yep. The Sherman family has been exceptional in terms of how they nurtured that culture inside of Dofasco. It maintains today. Mm-hmm. There is an expectation and there is a desire by employees to give back to community, to participate. And while we contribute financially to organizations, mm-hmm. A lot of our employees and a lot of that organization is participating at the governance level, right. At various, not-for-profits, across
volunteer
the city.
Capacities. Yeah.
In a volunteer capacity,
yep.
But also, there's a leadership experience that they're gaining as well, because the Shermans and certainly Dofasco, we look at our leadership team. It's not only the content expert, it's not only the technical expert that you look for, but it's the broader leadership quality, right?
Absolutely.
How you relate and how you deal with individuals outside of perhaps your normal working environment, I think speaks volumes to an individual as a character, and their leadership qualities and their leadership capabilities. So for us, there's a business driver here as well that not only says we work and invest to sustain our organization, mm-hmm. but we invest in community to help community sustain itself. And our employees benefit not only from living in a thriving community, but also having the opportunity to give back it's very mm-hmm. satisfying for people to do that kind of thing.
And to do the complete disclosure of bias up front, the Community Foundation has had a Dofasco or retired Dofasco mm-hmm. representative on our board since Mrs. Sherman was a founding board member.
Wow.
And to bring it forward to the present day, 62 years later, Bob Savage, who you well know, former VP of manufacturing with Dofasco, is one of our leaders on the board. And I think that speaks to a sense of continuity and commitment over generations, right? And that really stands out at a time when, so many of the former corporate leadership entities in this community don't even exist anymore, right? So it's made an oversized contribution that continues to this day.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about what we do together, because you've been a big part of our educational initiative, and you touched on briefly the challenge of STEM education and of the emerging opportunities for kids in this community to make a contribution in the future of steelmaking. So just expand on that a little bit.
So we're focused at all 3 levels.
Mm-hmm.
We're focused at the elementary, middle school, high school, and the post-secondary levels in terms of investments. Robotics at the elementary and high school level, apprenticeship at the college level, technical training at the college level, and then university is at the engineering and science. So a lot of funding chairs of various areas, research areas. But really looking to provide some experience and exposure to next generation to see what their opportunity is in advanced manufacturing, and to understand that with highly technical skills, you can take those skills and contribute to, in our case, a global organization, mm-hmm. A Hamilton footprint inside of the largest steel and mining company in the world, where we consistently rank near the top echelon of performance and productivity, using ArcelorMittal Dofasco as a portal to the world, if you want to, but actually, taking the skills that you would develop in the STEM area and actually applying them to make an advanced material that today contributes to, sustainable living through, lightweighting of vehicles. You've got zero carbon footprint buildings.
Yep.
You've got advanced packaging. We've been developing materials at Dofasco over the last number of years that people thought we would never see. We're impossible, right?
Okay. In the minute and a half we have left, and again, to fully disclose, I'm an old number 2 rod mill kid from Stelco.
Okay.
You worked on the better side of the street at Dofasco, and when you look at the trajectory of those two companies, obviously one of them sadly has gone through extensive hardship and decline, and yet ArcelorMittal continues to contribute and reinvest. Just look ahead 10 years and tell me where this company is, both globally and obviously given the bias locally in Hamilton.
Well, I think, if you look out 10 years, there are a number of drivers that will drive, push our organization in certain ways. I mean, the mobility and transportation is changing dramatically. Automotive is a franchise business.
Yeah.
So very much more sophisticated, value-added support for customers, advanced materials, driven by technology. You've got Industry 4.0, you've got the digitization of manufacturing, machine-to-machine communication. I know when Sean Donnelly, our CEO, has people come through the facility, the over 5,000 people, they often say, well, where are all the people?
Yeah.
They're sitting behind banks of screens, monitoring the process and ensuring that we succeed. So I say, Dofasco is a manufacturer of advanced materials driven by technology, and I see that. And we're only scratching the surface. I think there's a lot more that we are going to do in the future.
Fantastic. We are out of time. Tony Valeri, let me say thank you for almost a lifetime of friendship, for the contributions you've made both publicly and your elected service as a member of federal cabinet and a local MP, and now in the work that you're doing with ArcelorMittal Dofasco. It's been great to have you on, and I wish you good luck and continued success.
Thank you very much, Terry. Appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm Terry Cooke. You've been watching Vital Signs. My guest is Tony Valeri, the VP of Corporate Services with ArcelorMittal Dofasco. You can, as always, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I hope you'll join us again next month. We are over and out.